everyone. This is Doug Ammar. If you don't know Doug, you need to know Doug, and hopefully you'll know him well after today. But let's see, what could I say about Doug? I consider Doug an old friend, not because of your age, but because I feel very close to you as a friend. I met Doug about 7 years ago when we were trying to figure out really the criminal justice landscape in Georgia. And Doug is an expert, bar none, on that, okay? And so I met with him with a couple of our colleagues from GCO and had lunch down by your office, Doug. And the thing that I remember from that lunch were maybe a few things. One, that Doug is a passionate advocate for people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system, period. It's real. He is a man of faith. We might not agree on everything, might not. But he is a lawyer who is very talented at his craft and is applying it to some of the least fortunate folks to help them to overcome what the criminal justice system has done to them, okay? So with that said, Doug, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Eric.
All right, so let me set up my comments and our conversation by saying this. The state of Georgia over the last 7 years, I think, and feel free to disagree, but I think has charted a path of leadership on criminal justice reform issues that really has been noticed across the country. We're by far not perfect. There's so much more to be done. A lot of that has to do with the work that Doug has done in his group. We've helped a little bit, I would say, but there's just been in many ways, a sea change in the attitude that we have about criminal justice and how we treat people who need to be punished, maybe corrected, but not in a punitive fashion that follows them for the rest of their lives. And I think we have a lot to be happy about on that front. Our interest in criminal justice reform in many ways is tied to work, and the simple fact that having a criminal history makes employment almost impossible to find. I mean, it's not entirely impossible because we both know businesses that open up opportunities like that to people, but it is so tough, all right? And many years after a conviction or an arrest, this follows you. So today we want to talk to Doug. And Doug, I want to ask you first, if you can, while I was speaking glowingly of our state and how we're doing, I know there's a reality that there's a lot of work to be done. Can you set the stage for us about how things are here in Georgia on criminal justice issues?
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. It's great to partner with you guys and you individually, Eric, as a friend. And he won't admit it in public, but he is a lawyer. Eric, you can say that. That's right. That's right. So Georgia. So let me set the stage. Sort of first of all, most of you know probably that America incarcerates more people than anywhere else in the world. Does everyone know that? Right? That's not a new fact these days. We have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the incarcerated population. Also in America, let me give you a couple more America data points, that America, 100 million people roughly have a criminal record. That means someone who's been arrested or convicted. That's almost a third of the population. 25% to 30% or so of the population have been arrested or convicted. And the people, another data point that a lot of folks talk about is who's under correctional control. That means that you're in jail, prison, probation, or parole. Jail, prison, probation, or parole. And that's 1 in 35 in the country. In Georgia, so that's to give you some perspective. In Georgia, our incarceration numbers, we are the 9th leading most populous state, but we are 4th in incarceration, unfortunately. When it comes to correctional control, meaning who's in jail, prison, probation, or parole, we lead the country. 1 in 18 Georgians are in jail, prison, probation, or parole. Georgia has led the country on that number for quite a while, actually. And then with regard to criminal records, about 4.2 million, almost 40% of the adult population in Georgia have a criminal record. 40% of people in this state have been arrested or convicted. Now, that just sets the stage for the basic numbers so you have a perspective. This is not an issue that affects a small percent of the population. It affects a huge swath of the population. But that being said, Georgia has made some good gains. I mean, under Governor Deal particularly in his effort for the last, the 7 or so years, the last 7 years of his administration, he focused explicitly on trying to correct Georgia on these numbers. And the focus of the Criminal Justice Reform Council that he put together and the legislature put together was to do 3 things: to reduce the number of folks going to prison, to increase the training and support for folks in prison, and reduce the number of folks who once out of jail or prison, reduce the number of folks who were recidivating, committing another crime. And the huge efforts the state has made on those fronts. The number of folks going to prison in the state has dropped. We do both criminal defense work and as well as criminal records work and helping people who are in prison. And we've seen huge amounts of effort inside the system, the prison system, both with regard to treatment, single and dual diagnosis treatment inside prison, the amount of training that's going on in prison. The governor's people did a great job of finding out what industries needed people in this state, and then which of those industries would be open to hiring folks with a record, and brought those training, like diesel mechanic, for instance, welding, into prison. We've had clients of ours who have been receiving that kind of those kinds of training. And thirdly, on the third bucket of that effort, the effort to support folks once they've gotten out of prison, there's a massive effort called the Prisoner Reentry Initiative, PRI. You know how the government likes to use acronyms, but it's great. I mean, for the first time ever that there's a statewide effort. There's 18 sites around the state where the state has employed people to support people coming out of prison. And we work with all of those around the state. But so there's been a massive amount of attention that this state has given, and really Georgia has led the country and considered one of the national leaders on criminal justice reform because of those efforts. Is that set the stage?
Yeah, that's perfect. So one number you threw out was the number of people who have a criminal record in Georgia, and it's many millions of people, right?
4.2.
Okay. So if that's the case, and a criminal record creates problems for obtaining work, among other things, right?
Housing.
Yeah. What is it that you guys are doing? I know I love the work that you do directly with people to help them clean up their records. I know you train up volunteer attorneys to do that kind of work, but a larger effort is needed. Systemic reform is needed on this front, and it has to do with expungements. Can you talk to us about the campaign that you've got going?
Sure. And let me just say, our organization, we do both direct service and policy work. We've been around for about 33 years, and only about 10, 15 years ago, we got focused on policy. So we work on both fronts. And in our work, both direct service and working with folks who are going into prison and afterwards, we've seen that the criminal record is such a big barrier. In fact, in the early 90s, we started our own landscape company to employ our guys coming out of prison as an effort to really deal with the criminal record issue. We ran that for 17 years until the recession, but the point is a criminal record's a huge barrier. And we've done a lot of things to try to deal with it, both individually, starting our own social venture, to also doing policy work. So our effort, we're calling it a Second Chance campaign. And this is an effort to get Georgia really in some ways to catch up with the rest of the country. Georgia is only one of 40 other states in the country allow, if you've been convicted of a crime in this state, it stays on your record basically forever. 40 other states, that's not the case. Another 40 other states in the country say, look, if you've been convicted but you've been rehabilitated, and 5 or 10 years later you can come back and say, listen, yeah, that's who I was, but that's not who I am today. Then that record can basically be expunged, so it won't show up on your record when you go to apply for a job or housing. It doesn't get rid of the record, but it just lets employers in certain circumstances and housing folks not see it. So our campaign, our Second Chance campaign, which we've launched and have about 21 signing organizations to it so far, including GCO, thank you, is an effort to sort of expand Georgia's expungement law so that we basically can honor rehabilitation. I mean, that if somebody has not got back in trouble in a number of years, we think that person is showing the right direction, and that somebody's past mistake shouldn't always stay with them forever. So the law would basically allow a mechanism, whether it be a judge or a prosecutor, to essentially have that record be expunged, not the conviction's not gotten rid of, but when you apply for a job in certain circumstances and over a certain amount of time, that it won't show up. Again, 40 other states do this because of that massive 100 million people in America have a record. Many states are recognizing it's a barrier for folks getting back on their feet, and that affects all of us from a safety perspective, from a cost perspective. So the effort is really to have Georgia catch up, to Georgia acknowledge rehabilitation, and let Georgia essentially allow folks who've made a mistake in their past for it not to haunt them for the rest of their lives. That's a broad.
No, that's great. That's great. I know that you've gotten some pushback, which
Sure.
you would expect, right?
Sure.
So if you could, can you talk to us about the kind of resistance you receive, like the types of questions that you get, and demystify this for us a little bit? What are we talking about?
Sure. Well, let me say, are there any prosecutors in the House? I should ask that before I know we have at least one judge over there, Judge Kirk, but I'll be honest, most of the resistance we get are from prosecutors and around the state, meaning, most people, including legislators, including businesses, sort of get this. And so we're finding less and less resistance to this idea. But one of the questions we get is, well, wait a second, if somebody's been convicted of a serious violent felony, or somebody's been convicted of let's say being a sexual predator, are we going to not let that thing show up when they apply for a job in a daycare? That's not what we're talking about. Is that there's specific laws already in place that say if you've been convicted of a crime that basically would keep you, for society's safety, would say you shouldn't be around kids or vulnerable populations. There's a whole set of laws of which protect that population. So this is not that. That's what first I'd say. And a lot of folks say, well, you're talking about people who have really serious crimes or a long history. You're not talking about that. Most of the cases, most of the statutes around the country, and what we've been working on is really dealing with the vast majority of criminal offenses, which are non-violent cases, property and drug cases, where folks, over about 80% of all arrests and convictions in this country are non-violent cases related to drugs and alcohol. So what we're saying is that that's one of the concerns we hear. Well, you're talking about somebody who's been a real danger to society. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about, again, the vast majority of cases, which are non-violent cases, somebody who's made a mistake, somebody who had a problem, but that's not a problem anymore for them, and the ability to show that to a judge, to show it to the system, to say, that's who I was, I made a mistake, or I had a problem, that's not who I am today, and let the system sort of acknowledge that. One thing I would add, though, too, a data point that we use a lot, there's a number of studies around the country, and we have a ton of studies in our table. We have flyers that can point to a lot of stuff. But one of them is that there's a sense of which out there, if somebody commits a crime, there's a sense of which people say, oh, that guy or that person, they are a criminal, right? They are likely to do it again. And that's a common perception. But actually, the data doesn't support that. What the data supports, and there's been a ton of studies on this, is that if somebody commits a crime, the question of whether they'll commit another crime is really based on how long of time is lapsed between their first crime and the future. And essentially, about 3 to 5 to 7 years, depending on the age and the nature of the crime and the person, if you've gone about 5 years without committing another crime, then you are as likely as that person is as likely as you or I or any average American who's never committed a crime to commit a next crime. In other words, people do make mistakes, but if you don't make other mistakes, you're not likely to do it again. And so that's also what we talk to people when we hear objections. People say, well, just because you make one mistake does not even statistically mean that you're likely to do it again. And that's what I think we want folks, that's some of the responses we give to folks to let folks know, to assure them that, and lastly, I'd say this too, Eric, is that a lot of folks we know in working with the legislature and folks around the state is that people are concerned about safety, they're concerned about cost. And one of the things, again, a number of studies out there, we document this and we can point you to a lot of studies, is that when states do allow for expungement of convictions, when the states do allow people's past mistakes not to haunt them for the rest of their lives, safety goes up, meaning recidivism goes down, people commit less crimes because people can get jobs. And also costs go down for incarceration, tax bases go up, a number of studies all over the country that point to this. So for folks who say, well, wait a second, are you making our community less safe? Are you going to have us spend more money? And the answer is, the community will be safer when you pass these kind of laws, and it'll cost the community less, and people's income goes up, and the tax base goes up. So those are the things we respond to when we hear some concern.
Makes a ton of sense. I know that one of the statistics that we talk about is the chance of recidivism and how quickly it drops if somebody is able to get out, get a job, and keep it for at least 6 months to a year. The recidivism rate drops by 2/3 or more. And anything, including a criminal history, that keeps them from doing that, we've got to rethink it. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you
very much. We're running low on time, and instead of continuing to ask questions, the thing I will tell you is that Doug has a great booth back here with lots of information on the effort. We have some stuff on criminal justice reform as well that you can take a look at. They have a wonderful website with additional information. The last thing I will ask you, Doug, is if folks in the room wanted to help you in the expungement effort, how can they get involved?
Well, we'd ask you to sign up either as an individual or as an institution if you're willing to support the campaign. And if you sign up as an individual, we will keep you involved in an email list and invite you. We have at least 2 days at the Capitol already scheduled for next year, this next session. We have a number of events that are happening around the state up until then. We'd ask you to, if you get on that list, we'll send you updates and ask you to, drop a note to your legislator or make whatever comments you want, or come to one of the events we have at the Capitol. And those are, as some of the folks know, because we partnered with events at the Capitol, we have one big event at the Capitol. We call it Justice Day. It's usually in February. And this past year, we had 33 different organizations that were partners with us and over 500 attendees. That's the kind of opportunity to come and talk to your legislator about these issues and help us make Georgia really safer and more productive for all of us.
Awesome. If you will, join me in thanking Doug.